Today, we're jumping right into a detailed critique of a pretty well-known video essay by BadEmpanada called Holocaust Education Is for Israel. Our goal is to walk through the main arguments of that critique so you can see exactly how it breaks down the video's thesis.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. This quote really sets the stage for the entire analysis we're looking at. The critique isn't saying you can't ask this question. Not at all. It's saying the problem is in the method, the way the argument is built. It claims the video takes a few specific, cherry-picked examples and then blows them up into this massive, universal theory about all of Holocaust remembrance.
So, the first big point this critique makes is that the video essay commits what's called a fundamental category error. Sounds a bit academic, but let's break down what that actually means.
A category error is basically like putting something in the completely wrong box. The argument here is that the video essay makes this huge leap. It finds some real examples of institutions politicizing history, and then it assigns that same political motive to the entire global field. We're talking every museum, every curriculum, every survivor testimony. It's applying a specific charge to a vast, diverse category.
And here's the crucial distinction. Yeah, people and governments absolutely fight over the meaning of history. It's called memory politics, and it happens with pretty much every major historical event. But according to this analysis, just because that fight exists doesn't prove there's some single, secret master plan behind the whole thing. To claim it all exists for Israel is a much, much bigger claim, and it needs a lot more proof.
All right, let's move on to the second major point of the critique. This one really zeroes in on the kind of evidence that's used to build the argument in the video essay.
The critique basically says, hold on a second, the video essay doesn't really answer some key questions. First up, how widespread are these examples? Are the policies it cites the norm in, say, Germany, Argentina, and Japan, or are we talking about a few specific places?
In building on that, are these examples truly representative of a wider trend, or are they just outliers? The handful of really loud, controversial cases that get a ton of media attention. The difference between an outlier and a trend is absolutely critical if you're trying to make a huge claim.
And finally, the critique asks if the video really grapples with how incredibly diverse Holocaust remembrance is. It's not a monolith. The way it's taught and remembered is shaped by so many different national histories, survivor communities, and academic debates. It's different everywhere.
So, according to this critique, without actually answering these questions with data, the video's big conclusion that this whole educational ecosystem is ideologically captured just isn't properly supported. The groundwork is missing.
And this line just perfectly sums up the source's point. A string of powerful, vivid examples that all point in the same direction can feel really convincing. But the critique argues that's not proof, it's curation. It's carefully selecting the evidence that fits your pre-written story, which is a very different thing from representative evidence.
Okay, next, the analysis shifts gears a bit. It looks at how the video essay allegedly handles some really important historical concepts, especially the whole idea of comparing the Holocaust to other events.
So the source makes a really sharp distinction here. On one hand, you've got bad faith or just lazy analogies, like when someone screams Nazi online just to end an argument. On the other hand, you have serious, good faith comparative history, where scholars compare events to better understand how they work. The critique says the video just blurs this line, making it seem like any caution against lazy comparisons is really a total ban on all comparison.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The critique argues that the video sets up a straw man of the idea of Holocaust uniqueness. A straw man, is when you build up a weak, distorted version of your opponent's argument just so you can easily knock it down.
And the critique points out that when historians talk about the distinct features of the Holocaust, things like its industrial scale or continent-wide scope, that's just normal historical work. It's what they do for every single major event, whether it's the French Revolution or the fall of the Roman Empire. It's about understanding the specific mechanics of what actually happened.
And this is so crucial. The analysis says that acknowledging those specific features doesn't mean you can't also believe that other genocides are horrific, that comparing them is valuable, and that never again should apply to everyone. The critique argues the video presents this false choice. Either the Holocaust is this sacred, untouchable thing, or it's just a political tool. The analysis says you can and should reject that binary.
This brings us to what the source calls the most difficult, but also maybe the most important part of its argument. What it sees as the human cost of framing this history in such a purely political way.
The core claim here is that when the conversation becomes so focused on how the memory of the event is being used or misused politically, you run a huge risk. The actual human catastrophe, the suffering of millions, starts to fade into the background. The event itself becomes less of a tragedy and more of a political prop, a football to be kicked around in today's debates.
And the critique reminds us that this history became so prominent for real historical reasons, not just because of some top-down political project. We're talking about one of the most meticulously documented crimes in history, happening during the most studied war in history, and the decades-long, tireless fight by survivors and their communities to make sure the world would never, ever be allowed to forget or deny what happened.
So, after all that, what's the bottom line? Let's pull all these threads together and look at the final verdict from this critique.
The analysis lands here. It says that criticizing how memory is politicized is perfectly valid and important. But it argues the method used in the video is a prosecutorial narrative, meaning it's not weighing the evidence, it's building a case for a specific verdict from the very beginning. And in doing that, it argues the video itself becomes a form of distortion.
And the critique ends with this really powerful thought. It suggests that if you want to fight the political weaponization of history, the answer can't be to just grab that weapon and aim it in a different direction. It warns that reducing this vast, complex history to nothing more than a political apparatus is its own form of weaponization.
And that leaves us with this final, really crucial question. It's the central challenge this critique puts forward. How do you hold institutions accountable for the way they use history without accidentally flattening or diminishing that very same history? It's a question that goes way beyond this one debate, really. It gets at the heart of how we engage with all of the most difficult parts of our past.